Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion. Second hour is something we want to spend a little more time on. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about building audio or not audio, but lighting and video on a budget. So if you've got questions about that, we'll do the best we can to get into a budget. So we'll talk about those things in the second hour. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. Noah asks us, Chrome Remote Desktop seems not to be reliable as I've started scaling my business. What other remote access tools do you recommend for a small company with around 15 Macs?
Go ahead, Serge.
I'm using Telescale to establish a VPN in between all my Macs. And then I'm using the integrated Screen Connect from the macOS software. That way I don't rely on any other software capturing my screen and doing some crazy things.
And do you ever use Apple Remote Desktop? Still?
No, I never had to use Apple Remote Desktop professionally, and Screen Connect is doing the job for me.
Sounds good. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania says, do Blackmagic video hubs have a way to grab a snapshot of how the ins and outs are patched? You can save the names of the ins and outs, but not the patching. Would love something similar to the config file on an ATEM. Ideas?
You can actually, I do believe you can export a spreadsheet of your ins and outs and then load them back in again. We've definitely done that in the past. I don't have it right in front of me. I was trying to do a step-by-step of what that looks like, but you, it's literally just a spreadsheet, just columns of the I/O that's there. In fact, you can build that spreadsheet, just in Excel or in Numbers or Excel or whatever, and then just load it in, and it will build out all of your connections. Next question.
Mitch Hill in Wilmington, Delaware, and here on the panel says, want to have a POV or point of view camera to cover slams and lanes at a basketball event. Would a Marshall CV503-WP do the trick?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, we talk a lot of times about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, but that Marshall's kind of neat. It's also waterproof, just in case you put it in a sporting event where it could get wet. The question is the quality there?
It won't be the same as it will not be the same level as the micro cinema or the micro studio. I was just looking to see if I had some pictures of some of those. But I I worked on a basketball thing, and so I think I might have taken some photos of it. I can't remember. So anyway, but I don't know if you won't get the same quality. I mean, again, the chips. I think the chip size on that's pretty small. I think is it 1/2.3 or 2.6, something in that range. So it's considerably smaller chip size. So you may, and some of those smaller Marshalls just aren't really built for action in the same way. So you may have, so that would be it probably wouldn't be my first choice. A lot of times, what I was going to try to show you is that if I can find it, is that oftentimes they have pretty large cameras up there, that they're putting. They're not bashful about putting big cameras on over top of that. Sometimes they're right behind the glass, depending on how clear the glass is, and sometimes they're up and over. But it's I think that the micro would probably be better than the Marshall as far as that goes. John,
there are several different options from Marshall, and even some that have interchangeable lenses. There actually was a Linus Tech Tips video where he installed a bunch of them at the racket park court his kids play at during COVID, so all the parents could kind of watch the games. So just some options to look at there. I can try to find a video and send it to you, Mitch.
Yeah, I think for some reason I don't have a close-up of I know I took them. Anyway, next question.
Next one comes to us from Noah Sargent again in Fullerton. How do you handle cloning Macs? I have 4 new computers that need the same software installed and settings set. I'd like to do it once, not 4 times.
Go ahead, Serge.
With the new M1s, I think the only solution that will be reliable is Carbon Copy Cloner. I'm not a big fan of cloning directly the whole system. I think the best way will be to set up for a computer as a template and then use the migration tool of Apple to reintegrate these software to other computers.
I have to admit that I know that it's a pain. I used to have a fleet of probably 60 Macs, and I still insisted. We did carbon copper on a handful of them. We would flash them pretty often to go out in production, but they were flashes of their own OS. When we got a new computer, I have to admit, we always installed everything piece by piece. Like it was one of those things that it wasn't. And then we clone it. So we would install it carefully, piece by piece by piece. Then we'd use Carbon Copy Cloner to clone that as this is the base state of that computer that we would return it to often. So it would come back from a production, and we'd take off what we needed it to, and then we'd flash it so that it was back in its zero state. But we didn't flash from one computer to the other. I may be on PCs, we do it all the time. Just the Macs, we found that there would be computers that were cloned from one computer to another, not a clone of a computer to itself, but one Mac to another. We found that we saw anomalies on the Mac that was cloned to that were really hard to put our finger on, but just little things that just weren't working well. And we just became superstitious. I can't say that we had a reason for it, and we became very superstitious that those Macs were less stable. And when we reinstalled everything piece by piece, they became stable again. So that observation had us not do that ever. And I will say that, to me, 4 times isn't enough to be like, if you said I have 50 computers, we might have to think about it, but 4 times is a day to do it. I wouldn't go through the trouble of doing that. Go ahead, John.
I manage a fleet of about 200 Macs within our enterprise environment. So I have a software solution called JAMF, J-A-M-F, and it allows you to do automated provisioning, MDM. It's a really great product that has allowed us to kind of, lock down the products as well as to automate the install, OS imaging. It's very similar to like SCCM if you're familiar with the Windows world.
Jamf is the leader for that. I didn't bring it up because it's only 4 Macs, and usually Jamf is something you do when you've got lots and lots of them. But it's definitely, they are the leaders in kind of managing a fleet of Macs. Go ahead, Peter.
I tried one time I ran into the same kind of questions that you ran into, Alex, which is there was something not quite right when I did a clone to a new machine. So what I did is I took a lesson from Jamf, actually, but I built a set of homebrew scripts along with AppleScript to rebuild a machine from a known state.
Right.
And so I could run that every time. And I've done that a few times just to practice it. Can it work? I'm not sure what I do with it anymore, but.
And again, we found that cloning a computer and then putting its own clone back on it works perfectly. Like it's just that we just never found that to be a great experience. And I think what Jamf is doing is an automate. I don't think it's cloning it. I think it's installing those things, I believe, one at a time. It's not. And I think that's the way that I would do that.
That's why I took a lesson from Jamf as I built the machine.
Yeah. Go ahead, Serge.
Another solution I use to do exactly that, to do backups of a machine and restore them with Macs, is Acronis software. I know Acronis is more known in the Windows world, but it's still a solution for Mac.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. And Tony says, question for John Preto and the Office Hours Space Group. Is it time to think about the Office Hours Space Satellite? And if so, how?
Go, John.
So, Tony, you're not too far off. If you watch Firefly launched last Saturday. They launched a 90-foot tall rocket that went orbital to launch little satellites. And so one of the guys on our team actually is a partner in a company called Beyond Earth, and they're doing exactly that. They're doing 400-kilometer orbital satellites. So that day's coming soon. And the new brand for the OH Space is Garage Rocketeers, by the way.
And what are the regulations on that?
I have no. I'll talk to Fred Radford. Is our guy in that regard. He'll know.
I'd be curious what that is, because there's a lot of I just was reading an article about the fact that they're tightening all the rules about what you can put into orbit, because they're, it's as soon as it becomes non-operational, if it doesn't have the Starlink, I think is designed to just kind of, because it's so close, if it becomes unoperational, it just falls back into the atmosphere and burns up. But this one is unclear. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. And Douglas this time says, would volunteer projects like LibriVox be a useful entry point into the VO world? And he's got a link there.
Good, John.
I think the biggest thing, like we learned from Monday, is just do it.
Yeah.
So whether it's this free LibriVox thing, or if you're looking at joining a group of people who are already doing voiceover work, or just putting audition tapes out there, just getting out there and actually doing it is going to be the biggest first step.
Yeah, I think it's actually a great service. So LibriVox, for those who are listening, is open source. It's open source books. So they're taking books that are not covered by copyright, and they're having folks volunteer time to do the voiceover, so that folks that are sight impaired can listen to the books that are there. And it's all volunteer. And so people are being able to put those in. And I think that it's a great way. When you want to learn something, you really want to try to avoid doing it for yourself, just doing a demo reel or doing a demo tape or whatever, and just trying to put something together. It's really better to do something that is actually going to be used, because it just creates a different level of pressure on the system. And so I think that LibriVox would be, I've actually looked at it going, oh, if I ever thought I wanted to do books, I would take a look at that. And I just haven't, in my copious free time, as you know, I have a lot of it. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was also saying, don't think you need to do anything formal like that. When I first started out, my first program director at the radio station I happened to be working at said, if you want to do actual commercial work, stop thinking that you need to do something in order to do it. Just start reading out loud. And I don't care what you read. He literally said, read TV Guide out loud or read the newspaper ads. You just want time in using your voice formally. So you're going to take copy, you're going to put it in front of you, and you're going to read it for 10 minutes a day and do that consistently, and then improve it to 15 minutes a day and 20 minutes. What you're doing is building musculature, and it's more important to do it consistently in your spare time than it is to formalize the setting that you're going to record in and record a long piece. It's just like learning to run. Little and increase your stamina over time.
Next question.
Michael Smith in Silverado, California. Tom, any idea when we can expect to see the small rig cage for the iPhone 14 Pro Max?
Go ahead, Tom.
Best guess, I would say another month and a half, because it takes them 8 to 10 weeks to do the fabrication of the new cage and get it out on the market.
Next question.
Next one, Tyler Roberts is in from Chambersburg. The Grass Valley T2 IDDR that we use for stream slipping died. Grass Valley has discontinued support. What are the options to time delay a recording for playback by 1 to 2 minutes?
Yeah, there's probably a couple different options there. Obviously, the most obvious one for time slipping is EVS, but it's probably more expensive than the grass that you were using in the first place. There's Dreamcatcher, which is probably still, it's by Evertz, that is probably still more expensive than what you have here. There's also 3Play. So NewTek has a piece of hardware called 3Play that should be able to do exactly what you want. I think it's in the $15,000 to $20,000 range, somewhere in that range. And then you could also look at something like Softron. So Softron should be able to record it. They have an M replay, and that should be allowed. I haven't used it for slipping specifically. Usually when we're slipping, we're using EVSs. But if you're trying to slip, I think that might be one. The tricky part for those listening is this isn't playing out something. This is replaying or playing something at a different time while it's still recording. And so it's a little bit of a tapping your head and rubbing your stomach kind of thing for a computer to do. And so EVS is, the vast majority of this market because it's ubiquitous, and it's been around since the, I think, early 90s or late 80s or something like that. But there's other ones that have cropped up in those areas, but those are the ones that I know of. Go ahead, John.
So this is funny because Doug Ferguson has a 3Play that just died, and Doug now is evaluating. Doug's evaluating the Dreamcatcher unit, which is right below the EVS unit. Yeah,
the issue with the Dreamcatcher is operators. So the Dreamcatcher is less expensive, and for most people will do exactly what the EVS does. The real challenge is you can't find any operators to run it. So if you're going to run it, if Doug's going to run that, then it makes sense for him to do that. If he needs to hire operators in given cities to do this, then people tend to lean back into using an EVS because they can find people. It's really more of a talent pool problem, because in every major city you can find a collection, because as long as especially if there's a national football team, you can tend to find local EVS operators. Next question.
David Brady in New York City comes in next. Any solutions, homegrown or commercial, that can provide HLS multi-viewer capabilities? We have numerous 24/7 streams and are looking to have an overview of their health.
Go ahead, John.
In the past, I've used a product from JohnGate, johngate.com, and they provide a way to look at different IP streams, HLS, SDI. They have some health monitoring there as well, alerting around it. Very cool product, not too expensive. That was my experience when I needed to do this.
Yeah, it depends on what you're trying to what data you're trying to pull from them. Sony makes an analyzation tool, which is I think in the $5,000 range or something like that, that will analyze it. I don't know if it does a multi-view of it. I think it's just a per stream, and it will really analyze it all the way down to the bits. We've been pressuring. Jonas started to come up with a great one to look at files, and I was like, well, could you look at the files while they're streaming? and we have to remember that HLS is not a HLS is just saving files, and so you could be opening those files and seeing the compression on a regular basis, as well as looking at the health of the input. So you might want to talk to Jonas about whether that might be more of could be commercialized a little bit more. Maybe you would give him more incentive to do a live one. I know he's thinking about it. And so those are some. And there's there's one more that I can't think of right now. As far as analyzing the videos themselves, Fabrics has a bunch of tools, and I believe that Fabrics has some tools that are actually focused on stream analyzation as well. We use them primarily for SDI inspection, but they might be another option. Next question.
Mitch Hill in Wilmington, Delaware, here on the panel, says Adobe is spending crazy money to buy Figma. Why is Figma worth $20 billion to Adobe, and what does it mean for motion design?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely worth it. They have a very large, every company that I know that's doing software development, they kind of cornered that market, so that when they're wanting to try to visualize what a piece of software is going to look like, they're all using Figma to do it. I haven't needed to use it for stuff that we've done, but it's basically it's part of the development tools, and Adobe has a whole suite of development tools that the reality is they lost. They had their own tools, and Figma beat them at their own game. And so what you do when you're a big company and another company beats your solution is you buy it. So that's what they did, is they bought into that market, and that's going to allow them to leverage that connection. I think the Figma community so far hasn't been super enthusiastic about the Adobe purchase, at least from what I've seen online. But I think that it's up to Adobe now to use the rest of their ecosystem to benefit the Figma. If they don't benefit the Figma users in 12 to 24 months, someone else will just come up and take all those users. I mean, it's not, and just buying them isn't going to be enough to keep them. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, you wonder if they're going to roll that into Frame.io as part of their collaborative suite, but
maybe I don't see Figma and Frame.io in the same world. Like Frame.io is more of a motion. I mean, Figma is really a development tool. Like it's a app visual. At least my understanding of Figma, of how I see it used in the real world, is app visualization and development, not necessarily motion graphics or video.
It is motion graphic hooks in it. It's collaborative. You can collaborate with somebody in real time doing your design work and things like that. So to that degree, it's interesting.
I've just never seen anyone use it that way. It has hooks to do that. I don't know if it. Maybe they hope to do something with that. It'll be interesting to see. Next question.
Next one comes from Tony Mobley. Tonight's Conversations with Tony Mobley will be simulcast on both YouTube and LinkedIn Live. Does the panel have any suggestions for consideration for the team?
Go ahead, John.
Make sure you have somebody who's paying attention to those 3 different chat locations and kind of funneling stuff back into Makana, where we want people to actually comment and ask questions. Live streaming on the multiple platforms may be a great place to get some eyes, but if you're not interacting with the viewers there, it's going to be very difficult to keep them entertained.
Next question.
Next one comes from Serge Blondin here on the panel from Montreal, Canada. Watching the new House of Dragon show on HBO with Dolby Vision, I found the image to be very dark on my Sony TV and my iPad Pro last gen. Is it a bad choice by the producer?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, they're just continuing what they were doing with Game of Thrones. Dark images, very subtle, light-colored things. Like the last episode I just watched is a whole sequence with the big dragon, and you had to kind of like squint just to see what was going on. So, yeah, a lot of complaints, and it's on a lot of the forums that they just are too dark.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, say what you want about broadcast TV, but the standards were always very precise about where your chroma and luminance levels had to fall within a range. And I think with all the different viewing options now, I don't think there's the same just do the levels to this and it'll work everywhere. And producers are trying to get this gloomy kind of look. And I think just like the big kerfluffle with Game of Thrones the first time, they don't always pay attention to what the audience wants to see.
So one of the big challenges with Game of Thrones or with any dark scenes is how compression manages black. So it's probably a lot. So what happens is you design these and you go, oh, we're going to go really dark and we're going to keep people and you have all those things. And so what they do is they look at it, but they're looking at an uncompressed 4K or higher image on a monitor, and they're making decisions on that. The problem is that once it becomes for vision, it'll be H.265. For your SDR, it'll be H.264 typically. Once that gets delivered there, what the compression tends to do is push blacks down a little bit more. They get deeper blacks because it's basically compartmentalizing where all these colors are. And some of the subtleties. Now, you should get better subtleties. I mean, you should be able to get some of those in Dolby Vision, but it could be just how the compression is being approached and how it's being delivered. The other thing to remember is that depending on your service provider, you may be not getting the highest quality version of your. This was something that came up in a discussion that it was kind of an eye opener for me. So the way that HLS works, everything's being delivered to you by HLS, and the way it works is there may be 6, 8, in this case, probably 16 different compressions of the video, all the way down to a very low res, all the way up to probably 4K. And that highest one might have a very high bandwidth that's there. Now, what happens is that your service provider, your ISP, can actually, so what happens is all those are being made available. You can go grab onto them. Then there's what's called a manifest, and the manifest tells the player, that's your HBO Max, player, what's available to it. So it can say these are all the choices, and if they have enough bandwidth, this is the highest choice. Well, your ISP may decide that if everybody gets onto that high one, it'll stress my system, and they can manipulate the manifest. So as it comes through, your ISP can just go, nope, not going to serve that one, and so they can take out the top ones at the ISP level. That will mean that you're getting one or two lower, and there's a huge difference. Like it falls off real fast. Like it's just like, and so, because they have one that's like this is what you should get there, and they put it out there. But we know that Comcast in our area does that they pull out the top shelves, out of that, so that and it just it's easier on their network, and it's really stinks. so it's why we can't have good things. Go ahead, Serge.
Is there a way to know which HLS I'm using when I'm using HBO Max? And by the way, that's the only thing I'm testing, because in Canada, there's no way to get House of Dragon in HDR without my Belfield provider or with the software they use for HBO in Canada. I have to use HBO Max with a VPN connected to the US.
Yeah, just trying to think of I don't know how, I haven't tried to take it out of the web page, out of HBO Max, but if you open up, typically how we get a hold of the manifest to see what the manifest is we go into the developer view and we look at the page, the source code for the page, and somewhere in there you're going to see an M308. Like suddenly somewhere hidden there is an M308, because that's what's delivering. You do it in the web page. So go into the HBO Max web page. I haven't tried to do it with them, but we've done it with other streams. You go in, you find an M308. Now a Safari will just turn that into start playing it, but it's encrypted, so it probably wouldn't play anyway. But if you take that M308 and put it into Chrome, Chrome doesn't know what to do with it. So it just kicks it out as a text file. Like it just goes, oh, here's your manifest. And it just, here's, so that text file will tell you that is the manifest, right? And so now you can go through it and look at it. Now what you do is the way that there's no science to it, but what you do is if nothing else is going on your computer and you see those manifests and then you have something like iStat menu, you can run it and look at how much bandwidth am I using, and you get a pretty good sense of where you are in that ladder, of what it's providing to you. Now, the other question is your computer going to allow it to, go to HDR 4K, or do you have to use an Apple TV, or those are the things, or Roku, or wherever you're watching it, or what are you watching it on? Or what is the OTT solution for you?
It's the Apple.
Apple TV.
Yeah, it's the Apple TV HDR.
Yeah. So it should work. A lot of it also has to do with who's paying who for what. Apple pays a hefty price to all the ISPs to carry their top. So the ISPs will cut that off if you pay them more money. Turns out, like they're the ferrymen, right? So if you drop a couple more coins in their little bag, and they'll play the top levels. So you'll find that Apple. Many things on the Apple TV that identify oftentimes get a better one, but it's really like Apple TV Plus will get better bandwidth. Mitchell.
Yeah, this is a really interesting conversation because it explains some things that I've noticed. I have DirecTV and I have Apple TV. And with DirecTV, if you're watching the show House of Dragon live, it looks one way, which is kind of dingy and a little dark. If you go to they have this feature where you can stream it.
Mm-hmm.
The streaming version looks better. And if you go over to Apple TV and you watch it, it's better than both of those. So it's definitely something's being done to give different levels of service.
Yeah, a lot of Apple kind of just pays whatever they need to pay to make sure that everybody gets the highest quality they can get wherever they can. Because that's their competitive edge, because they can pay. Go ahead, Bill.
I wonder if it has something to do with the last mile delivery in terms of this. The old broadcast standard black pedestal level used to be, 7.5 IRE, and it's 0 for digital. So there is more bandwidth in the digital space than there is in the analog space. And I'm wondering if something is truncating the low part of the signal because they have to feed into analog systems.
It's truncated. It's not truncated. It's just the compression. The compression is crushing the blacks, and then in the lower compression has nothing.
But
to
if
do
they're
with
taking like local TV and they're putting it on there, and the black levels are not fully.
But those delivery that he's talking about is digital files that are being delivered and then being served.
I know. I'm just wondering if something's getting screwed up in the math at the delivery point, and they're bringing it to the old broadcast.
There's no delivery point to get to your house. Like it's just bits. It's bits that that started at one server and ended up on the glass on your TV. There's no. It's not going in and out on that. If you're watching the channel, you are. But
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But Serge is talking about an app. Like he's watching HBO through an app, not through a cable service.
So you don't think there's any real the fact that
you're not getting a stream when you go to the app. You're not getting the stream.
No. I thought that was the idea. It looked good on the app, but what Mitch was saying is that it doesn't look good over the air, or not over the air broadcast, but his cable delivery system.
DirecTV is just compressing the bejeebers out of it.
Yeah,
that's the technical term, bejeebers. It's just, they're just cheap. They don't charge you a lot, and so they don't have a lot of headroom. It turns out a lot of these things are really expensive to distribute. Like the math for streaming doesn't really add up for almost anybody. That's why they keep on pushing the price up, is because when you start downloading a bunch of 4K and you watch it, there's still cost to those bits. They're not free, and it costs money to they're not paying retail for it, but it's a lot of money, and so especially when they're only charging you $8, a lot of people are using more than $8 worth of bandwidth every week now that we're all streaming all the time. So they have to kind of figure that out too. Next question.
Oops, sorry about that. Next question comes to us from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. If there is no fiber in your area, who do you talk to try to get it? The city, municipality, cable companies?
Peter?
Answer is sort of all of the above, because you're going to have to get, town clearance to run the new utilities if it's a new utility going across either the poles or the ground. The cable companies are probably less interested in doing that, though some of them are starting to deploy fiber in place of their old coax methods, but even then they're still using the loop methods in the neighborhoods, whereas Google and AT&T and I think Verizon, so the classic phone companies, if you will, are running back to a central office. I know that's the case here in the Austin area, is they run fiber back to the central office, which gives you, I'm not competing with my neighbors, so to speak, on the fiber connections, but you have to talk to them all. And there has to be a business case, because as I was talking to somebody the other day, works for AT&T, they're not going to put fiber into a neighborhood that has 3 houses per 40 acres. Right? The business case doesn't close at that point.
Go ahead, Tom.
Repeating a little bit of what Peter said, since fiber is a utility requiring right of way, I would start with your Chicago ward alderman and see what they know about what's coming up and go from there.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, usually in each city, there's a public service utilities commission that has to approve that kind of connection being made. Because I did ask the folks at Comcast, why don't I have fiber coming right to our building? And they say you have to talk to the city government. And I found out that the city government is demanding all kinds of things to be added to the agreement to allow them to run the fiber. They want Comcast to build a studio for them and other things that get into politics. But I can see why it's not happening.
Go ahead, John.
This is not a technical issue. This is a political issue. Alex will tell you the cable access, the pole rights are ridiculous. I mean, 10, 15, 20 year to get pole access rights. It's just ridiculous. The other solution or answer could be fixed wireless. Alex and I both have fixed wireless on our house, get anywhere from 300 up to 700 megs symmetrical. Tirana Wireless is a new company in this space, and WeLink, both of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are good patches in between. I think that to step off the non-political rail for a second, this is all just a big shakedown. like the telecommunications companies are dumping huge amounts of money into our representatives' pockets. I mean, into their campaigns to make sure that they don't really do what is needed, which is what they're terrified of, is that eventually we're going to realize that we like what we did with plumbing, electricity, and telephone. Fiber to the house should be a utility. Fiber should be every American should have, and other parts of the world too, but everybody should have fiber to the house. And the reason that it's different than having broadband to the house, which is something that what the telecommunication company wants, is for you to do everything incrementally, so they can keep on making money on each one of these little bumps. So they don't want to talk about fiber to the house where everyone's getting 1 gig per second. They want to talk about broadband to 25 by 3, like why don't we do that? Which they've already solved. Fiber to the house for every person means we have 1 gig today. By the way, we can go to 10 gigs tomorrow because we have glass to your house all the way to the house. We go to 40 gigs. So the thing is we can keep scaling up the solution without rebuilding the infrastructure every single time. And that is why some of them are rolling it out and investing in it, but it is something that we should charge everybody for it and make sure that it gets to every person. It would do more to transform this country, in any country, than pretty much any other investment that could be made in any country, because it suddenly gives everybody everywhere access to ultra high speed bandwidth, which means they can be part of larger economies, the global economy. The fiber is really the most transformative thing that someone can do. It's more valuable than roads at this point. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael again. How do you use Cloudflare tunnels? I've heard they can be useful for web applications, but can they work for other use cases?
I don't think we have. I don't know if we have anybody on our board today. You might want to wait until we have some folks. Oh yeah, go John.
They can be useful. What you're essentially doing is creating a secure tunnel between you, Cloudflare, and then you are on the Cloudflare side allowed to determine who you want to talk to on the other side. It allows you to not use like port 80, port 443 for traditional web traffic. It can remove attack surfaces and kind of shift your edge out to the cloud, which allows you to take advantage of other features like rate limiting, DDoS prevention that would, typically tackle smaller networks that you would be handling yourself. You could use it for point-to-point, essentially, of like your iPad device is at home and you want to be able to remote access something on it, or a Mac at home. You can start leveraging it for that as well. But really, it's built for enterprises who are trying to shift their edge out away from their network and take advantage of cloud scale to prevent any sort of DDoS attack.
And by the way, if you want to ask more questions, we've probably got space for a couple more before the end of the hour. Otherwise, we'll just start the second hour early. But if you've got more questions, we've got a great panel here, and we're happy to answer them. Next question.
Serge Blondin, Montreal, here on the panel. For the iPhone 14 Pro user in the panel, what is your experience with always-on display and battery life?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, the first day after the install, I had high battery usage, but that's usually due to the new install indexing, getting everything sorted out on the iPhone. Since then, there's been no issue. Battery life has been great.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I was going to say the exact same thing. Everyone complains about battery life the day after the install, and it's in fact that's actually a Darwin problem that goes back to the beginning of its re-indexing.
Not Charles Darwin, but no. Darwin the
Darwin
OS.
the OS. Darwin the Open OS version of Mac OS.
Right.
And it just is. And then I used to have to plug my iPhone 11 in overnight on the bedstand next to me. And because it would drop to like 20% overnight. Now mine drops from full to 85% overnight. Right. So I think it's doing fine. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Bill.
I noticed, I haven't noticed yet because mine is arriving in about 5 days. They gave me an update. So it's about a week earlier than their delivery, but they're still behind. Again, I ordered it about 5 hours after they went on sale. So it's going to be interesting. I got the smaller of the two displays because I'm not that interested in bigger phones anymore. I want to see how that lasts. And as soon as it gets in, I'll let you know how it compares to the big ones, which I think most everybody else has.
Yep. Go ahead, Tom.
And since I set the phone on the charger each night by the bedstand, I noticed that it also gave me a little message with iOS 16 that it said it would go into full charge mode at 4:30 a.m. because it knows I'm going to get up at 5:30 a.m. And so it's doing a lot of power management stuff there too.
Yeah, I have found that I just plug mine in overnight, and I'm now starting to plug it in the evening while I'm working, while I'm doing something, but I never need to charge it during the day. Like I have the max and it's not even really that close to the bottom. There's occasionally when I work it hard for some reason here and there, but overall it's been great. I have to admit that it's been really hard for me to adjust to the always on screen because I always feel like it's not off. Like I want to turn it off and I just want to see nothing. And I'm still getting used to the fact that I can still look down and see it. I don't like a lot of distractions. And so I turn all the notifications on, a little debris gets put on my screen. So that's the only thing that I have to kind of keep track of. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Apple has the AU round trip AAC audio unit to enable audio engineers to listen to their mixes with the effects of compression applied. Is there an equivalent for video?
I don't think we really need it. When we apply filters to the video, we see it immediately. And I think we don't see it until after compression, to your point. There's no way for us to really view video that it's going to be, how it's going to look. It takes too much processing currently to view, like, what does this look like in H.264, H.265 in real time? So we'd have to wait. And usually, oftentimes what we do is compress a minute of it to take a look at how it looks, to do kind of a sample. Go ahead, John.
Would proxies show you a very similar result of the type of compression?
Yeah. Again, what we do is a lot of times we just take a section of it, and we just say, just output this part. And usually it's a part that we think we don't know how it's going to work. And that's if it's a long one. The compression times have gotten so short these days that a lot of times if I'm going to go get on a phone call, if I have a meeting, I just run an export. I go into my meeting when I get back, the export's done, and I take a look at what the whole thing. I can just spot check the whole thing because I don't need to do it. One of the things that we do, again, it just depends on how mission critical your compression is. But a lot of times when we're doing that, if we're going to compress it, we take the original, we output it at compressed, then we bring that compression back in, we set it on a layer above our edit, and then we set that file, the blending mode to difference. So we get they're lined up perfectly frame for frame, and then we set it to difference. And what you see is the difference between the two. All you'll see is the compression between the two. I will warn you that if you do that, you'll never see TV again the same way. So you just need to be really careful. This is definitely a red pill operation, and I've already ruined my eyes for it. So but I'm warning you that sometimes it's better just to take the blue pill and just keep looking at your compression. But if you really want to analyze it, just compress something out in Final Cut or Resolve or whatever, put it on a layer above and set it to difference with the frames lined up. And what you're going to see is all the compression, because it's just going to be lighter where it's different. And what you're going to see is a bunch of little blocks everywhere. And then once you see all those little blocks and you see the gamma shifts and you see all the other things that happen in a compression, when you watch TV, you'll see it. Your eye has now been tuned. It knows what to look for, and it will immediately lock onto it, and it'll ruin your TV viewing experience often. So anyway, so I'm just letting you know that it's a red pill. Go ahead, Bill.
I don't know if it works for all the other software the same way, but with Final Cut, one thing that they nicely added in, if you are applying a lot of effects to a video frame, particularly high computational ones like noise reduction, it will not do it in real time as you're playing back, but if you park on a frame, it will quickly render out that frame with the results of that overlaying code so that you can see what the final is going to look like. I find I use that consistently. I'll look at it and I'm going, it's a little fuzzy. I'm not sure I like that. Park on a frame, give it like a half a second or a second, and it'll pop into the sharpness of the delivery. So they have an algorithm back there that's allowing you to do real-time look at what your export's going to be without actually having to render it all out.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, there are several apps for the watch that are great for photos. The native camera app and shoot app are great, but do you have any other recommendations for watch apps?
I have to admit, I just haven't thought of my watch as a photo app. I haven't really gone down that path at all, other than using it to fire off the standard one. I think that there is a Filmic Pro one as well as the shoot one that you can control, but it's the only thing I've really done with it is just I needed to start recording, or I need to stop recording. That's the only thing that I've used it for. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I use it occasionally as a trigger for that, using an actual app on the watch. And so it's good for shutter release and those simple things. I will also say that I have noticed a lot more interaction, like with my cable device, the Apple TV. I will look down on my watch and see that I have pause controls for what I'm currently watching, and I haven't done anything. So they continue to build out the ecosystem of communication between the watch and other Apple devices that you have. That's kind of a nice convenience.
Next question.
Next question comes from Ranjan Chandil in Los Angeles, California. What firewall would you consider for fiber over 1 gigabit up down? Most hardware devices seem to reduce throughput speeds to half.
Go ahead, Serge.
I will recommend the official pfSense Netgate solutions, the 400,000. It's a great firewall, and the spec will give you how much bandwidth they can do doing layer 3 filtering or doing IPsec and all these things. So you can budget with it.
John?
Yeah, the throughput really depends on what you're actually doing. If you want to get into packet inspection, deep packet inspection, you're gonna reduce the throughput a bunch. For 1 gig throughput with having all the features, bells and whistles turned on, I use a PA850 from Palo Alto.
Go ahead, Peter.
I'm going to say it depends on your use case, because what John and Serge said is spot on. But there are also some very big Cisco routers that will do a very nice job of doing deep packet inspection and not collapse your bandwidth as well. We use those in data centers a lot. But I will also say at home, you really have to think about how important that is. You can get fairly effective just by double natting, because things can't wander past the second router.
Yeah, and I think that it just again, it depends on the what you're managing there. It's just a matter of price. When you start going to 1 gig and you're actually wanting to be, stateful and make sure that it's all completely managed. That's when things start to get pretty expensive. We use Meraki hardware, and I think even the ones that we have in the office are not fully utilizing the bandwidth we have in the office because it's what we needed. We didn't need a gig,
Right.
but yeah, it's something that you have to kind of think about hard. They get expensive really fast. Next question.
Gilberto in Santa Cruz, Bolivia is up next. He says, how reliable is vMix for sending SRT streams, or should I consider a different software?
I think vMix should be able to send those SRT streams relatively effectively. I don't know. I'm trying to think of another like solid solution for that, for the streams themselves. I'm kind of looking to see if in the event chat, if anyone throws something in. It's not something that we've done a lot of here. So I don't know for sure. You might have stumped us, but vMix should work fine, as good as it's going to be for SRT. You can of course get hardware solutions like Epiphan, although their Epiphan Connect event didn't leave me with more confidence. It was more of a that didn't go very well. Next question.
Robert A. Olburn, Houston, Texas, says, what bag do you folks like for the MixPre 6.2 looking at the KTEL Stingray?
Mickey McAtour said the Orca bags or the KTEX. So that's his recommendation. I haven't had to buy a bag for mine for a long time, so I don't know. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next with, how can influencers use their influence positively with young people when social media sees self-destructive challenges, has gotten a negative reputation among community leaders, educators, and parents?
I think a lot of influencers are producing a positive, it's just that it's a little bit of everything. so you get, if you look at some of the stuff that's being produced, there's just an incredible amount of positive, just really useful information. It was funny. We had a discussion last night. My family was geeking out a little bit. For some reason, we got a discussion of what how did pi come along, and rather than trying to explain it, I just literally went to YouTube and said, history of pi, and there was like 10 things. I picked one, and we watched it for a little while, and it was a much better explanation than I would have given to my kids about how this was calculated and how many terms and how many digits and what they were changing and how they were doing the math and everything else. And I was kind of amazed by the whole thing, like that I could sit there and just quickly search up something relatively complicated and would get an excellent explanation of it in seconds. Go ahead, Peter. Can't hear you.
I guess my point is, this is almost the way this question is worded, it almost leads me to believe that he's thinking that the negative influencers, if you will, are having a higher impact than the positive influence. And I kind of put that in the same category as if news, right? If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead.
Yeah, I think that,
conversation.
I agree. And there's plenty of negativity and plenty of positivity all around us. And you at some point, you just have to choose which one you're going to listen to. Next question.
Next question, JJ McKenna, Santa Venetia, California. What is the brand name for the one-handed height adjustment mic stand? I play a lot of brass in the 90s, but I can't locate this very handy stand style.
Go ahead, John.
The K&M 26085, I'll post it in chat, is the one I've used. I know that Gator makes one as well, but this one for me felt a little bit better, had a nicer bass stand.
For the win. I was like, I don't know how we're going to know that stand. And you just nailed it. All right, next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. I love my Mevo's ability to use the native multicam switching or NDI. It's great. I've been trying out several PTX cameras with NDI and HDMI SDI out. Is there a way other than comparing recordings to really compare the NDI outputs?
So, again, I go back to exactly how I analyze footage. So if I'm looking at something that's going to compress the footage, I play something out. Usually something, we have clips, which I'll post. I'm going to try to post. I'm trying to find a place to put storage for our website. But I'll post some. We have these clips that we call Widowmakers, which are, there's almost no way to compress them well. Like they're just, it's like a big open ocean with lots of waves, and it's very complex, and it comes in and you can just see where things aren't working. And so I usually have a handful of those clips, and I run them. I just pass them through the system. It's a little hard when you're using these cameras because you're shooting something. But what you want to do is, if you can, especially if you can get an SDI, if they have SDI and NDI, you can record the much less compressed SDI, and then again stack them on top of each other. Set one of them to difference, and you'll see the difference between a low or zero compressed image and the compression, and you're going to get a real good sense of what the quality is from there. And again, it's something that will damage your experience for a long time on many things, but it's some of those early ones. And I have to admit, I did it with HX, so I did it with NDI HX, but my early experiments with that is why I don't use NDI. Part of why I don't use NDI was because I saw the difference. It was, but again, I need to go back and test it with NDI 5. Next question.
Gilberto is back from Santa Cruz, Bolivia with, on the SRT topic, is high vision, HAIVISIONS, a hitless failover feature proprietary, or can it be set up with any software?
I don't know. I don't know that question. High Vision makes, for those listening, High Vision makes a lot of great tools. Makitos. So not Meraki's, but Makitos, and they make a lot of good transport solutions. And they're kind of the founders of SRT. They are the founders of SRT, and so they have a lot of great solutions in this area. But they're pretty expensive for most people. But that I don't know whether the hitless failover feature is proprietary or not. It probably is. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Zipline Drones is in North Carolina, Arkansas, and Utah. What do you expect to see out of drone delivery services since this inroad with healthcare drones has started?
They're going to be huge. Like drone delivery is going to be massive. It's going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, it really opens up all kinds of possibilities. There'll be all the issues that we have with anything starting up. Drone, I think last week fell into the power supply somewhere and knocked out, and everyone lost power. So then like, we shouldn't use drones. I mean, humans make all kinds of errors, so we need to kind of put everything in perspective. So the drones will make mistakes. The drones will deliver things they shouldn't have. They'll put them in the wrong place. There's a whole bunch of things that'll happen that are wrong, but we're still going to end up using a lot of them, and they're going to be really convenient. And the idea that we have to wait for a whole day for something to show up is going to become something that we don't think about anymore. That I think that it's pretty explosive. Hopefully not too explosive. Go ahead, John.
Just funny because
we got two Johns. John Wallace.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, John Wallace.
All right. Motor whine, ear fatigue, I think is going to be the biggest problem for people in the audio field. Just hearing those drones flying around, that 2K hertz.
We have cars. Like I look out at all those cars. I live in a pretty quiet place, but if you look off you can still hear the hum of the cars. And during COVID, that was something that was really astounding to me. Was it suddenly it was really quiet, and all you could hear were the birds and everything else. And I was like, oh, it would be really nice if it stayed that way. Go ahead, John.
It just came across my desk yesterday. We have producers that live in North Carolina, and their neighbors are using this service, and they're really, really happy. I have a Grimaldi's Pizza about a mile away, and they have a garage door. Perfect for flying drones out for pizza delivery.
That's great. So it's gonna be Brave New World. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says a Swedish study mentioned that, and this is in quotes, people with disabilities are a group that can have challenges with cashless transactions. Wouldn't Face ID, for example, be a lot easier for those with disabilities than grasping small objects? Should be. Yeah, I think that could make it a lot easier. Next question. James Babbitt in San Diego here says, a great second hour Tuesday focusing on voiceover performers and technicians. Could you discuss the process of scheduling experts as guests for the second hour shows on office hours, and maybe a question for Sunday?
definitely ask on Sunday and we can talk about it in more detail. But generally, Josh, just to give you a little overview, Josh is managing the second hours. I fired myself, and Josh is doing a much better job than I did at starting to schedule this stuff. And so Josh is working on those things. He's also building councils for each day. So he's got a group of people that he's building up of people to think about it and reach out and figure things out. And I think that there's been a little bit of figuring all those pieces out. But I think that what you're going to see is the second hour is getting better and better and more dense as Josh continues to kind of work with a fairly large group. I don't know exactly how many people, but there's probably 20 or 30 people now that are thinking about across all the days that are, critically thinking about what do we put into individual days. And so it's something I attempted to do 2 years ago as we got started, and I just didn't have the time to do it well enough with everything else. And Josh is doing a fantastic job. And so if you're interested in those councils and if you're interested in being part of that process, I'd reach out to Josh Kaufman in Discord and let him know. He's got to figure out what fits where, but he's doing a killer job at putting those together. We're gonna, next week in the next couple weeks, starting on Monday, it's a little bit of a challenge because all of our stuff's going to be internal because we're making a bunch of changes to office hour to the OH2 as we go to OH 2.5, and we expect some storms as we make that happen, and so we don't want to have external folks getting caught up in that. But what you should see then is as we get most of our hardware kind of sorted out and everything else, you should see a much better 2.5 and incredible group of people coming in starting in November. So stay tuned for all of that. I'm pretty excited about it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. He says, I have a pair of Dell P2415Q monitors, 24-inch 4K, and I'm going to be upgrading from my 2013 Mac Pro to a Mac Studio. Would a pair of studio displays be worth the price? And he notes he's had bad experience with glossy glass displays.
Go ahead, Tom.
I had previously the LG Ultrafine 5K displays and used them for about 5 years. Did not like them at all. The studio displays came out. I've got a pair of them here with the Mac Studio and absolutely love them.
Yeah, I think that these are the ones that I'm trying to look at them really quickly to see. I think that these are the ones that we have. I think we have a whole slew of these. Yeah. They're either the ones that we have or they're close to the ones that we have. And I think we have 20 of them. So yeah, they work well. They fulfill a couple of things that are a requirement for me, which is that they use an C13 IEC cable. So that means that it's a standard 3-prong, just puts it, any power cable will go into them. They have a Visa mount on the back and they have HDMI. I will not buy a monitor that doesn't have those three things. so I don't want it. Then the other stuff is like, okay, do we need 1080p or 4K? And there's a bunch of other things, but it has to take it can be a figure 8 or which is I think a C7 and a C13. But generally C13, HDMI, Visa mount is like table stakes for buying a monitor for me, because otherwise it's just too hard to deal with. Go ahead, Peter.
The only thing I would add to that is the use case of, are you only hooking these monitors up to one computer, or do you need them to go back and forth between two or more? In my case, I've got 3 different Macs on my desk, and I want to be able to switch between them, some combination thereof. And I don't use a KVM.
I think that these Dells have one HDMI and 2.
Well, he's asking will the studio display replace the Dells? That's what he's asking.
No, I would probably not do that. I'd probably still get the Dells.
I'm using 3 Dells in front of me right now. 227s and a 32.
Yeah, I'd probably get the Dells. Yeah, unless you're doing really, really critical, and if you're doing, it's like semi-critical, and again, the Dells can get you pretty close to doing. If you calibrate them with a spider, you're going to get. If you're calibrating with a spider, you're pretty close, and then of course you're going to get better color representation for HDR with the studio, but not real color. It's not really like an HDR color accurate monitor. So it's nice if you have lots of extra money. The studio is great, but I think that otherwise I'd rather have more Dells than one studio, in my opinion, for the same price. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. I'm trying to find resolution information for social media sites to update a nonprofit's style guide. Does anyone have one updated recently that I can double check my work against?
Go ahead, John.
Hootsuite published a 2022 list of all the different formats recommended for social media. I'll post it in chat.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with, what are the secrets to making video look good when it is compressed and or streamed? Are there specific settings you can tweak, or is it just setting the audio video bit rates and pressing start?
So many things. So there's probably a second hour there that we're not going to have time to get to right now about compression. But what you set, it's the type of content that you have there. It's also you want to look at the quality of pixels. So sometimes it's not just great to have high resolution. Is it good resolution? Is it really high quality? And is that going to be worth it? The quality of every pixel, the keyframes. How many times are you going to add keyframes to it? If you're scaling, what kind of algorithm are you using to do the scaling? Those are all things that make a difference. What kind of compression what kind of compression process are you using? Are you using H.264, H.265, or other things, to compress those? And so there's a lot of different options there that become more complicated to really get it. The thing to understand is, like, when we send something out to compressor or media encoder, those things take a couple minutes. The movie that you watch when you download from Apple TV or Disney might take 2 or 3 days to compress for that 2 hours. And these are giant, beefy machines, bigger than we can afford. Takes them days, because what they do is they critically go through and they analyze every little bit, and they try to squeeze out the quality of every little, so a lot of this has to do with the processor just doesn't have time. So if you tell it, go ahead and do 2 passes, for instance, it's going to look for where the keyframes really should be as opposed to where it was going through it in real time. It kind of it's be able to look into the future and then come back and do the right thing. So 2 pass will improve it. But a lot of times these things are like, let me analyze this over and over and over. And then after 2 or 3 days of compression, they show it to people that they tend to refer to as golden eyes. And these are folks that just see everything, and they'll watch that film and they'll go, oh, I saw, at 35 minutes in, there's like this weird little compression thing that's over in the corner. Can we relook at that, And so it's to do it when there's, and then, then you get into, there's some streaming services that actually do things like they remove all the grain and they compress it, and then they add the grain back at the player. so that's a really fascinating thing. It saves them a lot of money. I think that it causes some other issues, so that there's a lot of things about that that everyone's trying to figure out how to squeeze the last little bit of data out. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, the other point I was going to make, because he brought up streaming as well, is we have an example right now. We can all see on our panel view at home where, and it's particularly obvious with Alex, is the streaming software, the video chain is causing things to get darker.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So Mickey and I discovered this the other night because he was helping me diagnose something with Zoom ISO. And when you screen share back what somebody is watching real time, it's interesting to compare the two things side by side and see how bad the compression really is.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to get some files that we're going to use to interrogate the stream a little bit that we can push through and say, okay, we're pushing something through from someone's house. What does that look like on the other, literally on YouTube? And then start to figure out what we can adjust to make that as perfect as we can make it. I'll go ahead, John.
Real quick tangential thought. Alex, have you seen the video where Marquez Brownlee uploads the same video 100 times to YouTube?
No, and it all came out differently?
Oh, no. By the 100th version, you can't even tell that it's a video anymore. It just tells you how much YouTube is compressing your files when you upload them.
He took the same one and downloaded and uploaded again.
Yes.
That's really interesting because, for a long time, one of the things that we learned to do was to do a really high quality H.264 compression before we sent it to YouTube, people would be tempted to put an Apple ProRes file up there to get the maximum compression. And we found that we like the H.264s better than the Apple ProRes tests because it quantized the quantization that was done initially by us, tuned to what we want, kind of pushed YouTube into a chute where it would just go, oh, okay, you got it, and it wouldn't change it very much. But it sounds like that's not what's happening now. That was a decade ago that we got into that habit, and it sounds like a great test. It's something we should think about again. Yeah. All right. We are changing subjects to our second hour, a little late. Sorry, we were running out of questions, then we got more questions, and then we got a little talkative. It's just what happens here. So anyway, now we're shifting over to the second hour and talking about budget video and lighting. So how do we now? I think that I saw this go out, and there was a claim that we go straight to the top, to the high shelf. But I just want to make sure we're clear that like straight to the top is most of what we talk about in office hours is the top of prosumer. Like it's not the top, there is the top, and then there's the more than what most people are used to using at home. So when almost everything we're going to talk about today would be considered by like someone like my brother, who's local 600, DP / all of it would seem, no matter what we do, is going to seem like budget to him. So I think that we want to keep perspective, and I think that that's important because a lot of times we really look at how I grew up in this industry thinking that I was buying top shelf whatever. I remember having a conversation with someone saying, "Well, my EX3 is 1080p too. It's got to be as good as your." I mean, I said this came out of my mouth. It's got to be as good as your Grass Valley cameras, as far as image quality. It's not. So, and I now have learned. So we want to always kind of know that just because it says it does something doesn't necessarily mean it's the same as those things. But I think that I think we can do more than ever. We can do incredible work with not a lot of money. I think that it kind of amazes me on a daily basis what can be bought, at the rate. If you look at, again, I have a couple of the Blackmagic 12Ks, and those things are producing incredible footage. I'm testing an FX6, which is only $6,000, I think, and it's a full frame Sony sensor. It does a really good job of that kind of thing as well. And so those are things that a lot of this stuff is what you can shoot, what comes out of these cameras is pretty amazing. It just depends on what whether you're trying to do something for $500 or whether you're trying to do something for under $10,000 for a camera, for instance. And lighting is also another thing for us to look at. There's just incredible amounts of lighting options now that are a lot less expensive than what they have in the past. And so I was sitting here just kind of talking on, thinking that some of our panelists would raise their hand, but they didn't. So we're just going to go to the next question. Go ahead, Bill.
Our first question comes from Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. Tom says, "Tell me more about the truss systems you use for mounting lights and displays."
It depends. So it's like how we truss those how we build truss depends on the weight, and it depends on the spans, that we kind of use there, and the kind of truss. So like, for instance, we had to span. So a lot of times I like to use triangular rail. It's just a little easier to work with for a variety of reasons. Triangular truss, but we couldn't span 30 feet with triangular truss. We had to go back to larger square truss to make that actually work. And that's just a physics problem. So, and we definitely couldn't use speed rail or anything else. And so I think that a lot of it depends with what we're mounting, depends on what we're hanging from it and how far it's going. Everybody knows my office wants to be rejiggered, but hasn't been because I'm so busy doing everything, trying to tear it apart as a thing. But, I just have pipe up there, but I have all the pieces to replace it with Maker pipe, which I think a Maker pipe for a little 10 by 10, an affordable solution, I think it totally works. As I looked at putting the Maker pipe into a larger space. So I have my larger space around me is 10 by 10. The space that's my office is 20 by 15. And as I looked at the physics of EMT and 20 by 15, I decided that that's probably not safe. It's not going to be, if I start hanging lights on it, it's probably, and I live in an earthquake prone area. So you think about safe in a different way. So what I'm looking at there is specifically using, I also didn't think I could span the entire length of my room with speed rail. So really what I'm looking at right now is corners and the edges being truss, like actual, some kind of, 4-point truss that I'm going to run between those, and then speed rail across it. And then, I'm going to, I'll have smaller things that I'm building with MakerPipe, but I felt like MakerPipe would span too far, for that process. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think that figuring out your scale is one of the problems. I mean, you go to a major concert and you're going to see a ton of truss because that's how they build their stages typically. Those are the big boy toys. They mostly have motorized lifts on them. And this is a very, very important efficiency thing, because if you can lower the truss so that you can work from the ground rather than working on ladders and something like that to mount all your fixtures, and then just raise it up to the appropriate angle for the preset of all the lights, that's how you build a traveling show. You get down smaller than that and suddenly you're in normal size box trusses that somebody like me would use in a ballroom or something like that to do a lighting grid over the stage there. It's a level below a smaller box truss, but still a pretty commercial product. And then you go all the way down to the bottom. There are little display trusses. I've seen them as small as like 4 or 5 inches that you might use in a 10 by 10 table area to put up a little lighting, a simple lighting thing without heavy fixtures and things like that. So as you increase the idea of triangle truss versus box truss versus its load rating is something you do have to pay attention to, because even as we're moving into less and less heavy fixtures, more and more cob chip on board things, more and more LEDs, less tungsten, which used to be in heavier fixtures. I mean, even an old standard theatrical Leica weighed a ton more than the smaller versions now. So you needed a much more robust truss system in order to not bend the center or make it unstable and unsafe. So it's really, I think, a matter of finding the size of things you need, finding the right products, and making sure that you buy a little better than you need so that the system is stable.
And the other thing to think about is if you're going towards a wall, so you were talking about lights. So lights are where we start thinking about grids. And for those watching, grid is typically, you have some version of a grid that's every 2 feet or every 3 feet or every 4 feet, depending on how much space that you want or what resolution that you want. And you're hanging these grids across here. And the big thing with a grid, every time someone says they're building a home studio, I'm like, you should really think about a grid. Like, even if it's a small one, even if so the one that I have that I'm going to replace with MakerPipe in the interim before I build the larger one, it's just 4 C-stands and it's got a grid built on it and it just goes up, but I can bring it down. The C-stands I can bring down and then I can bring them back up again if I want to work on something or wire something. It's a little bit of a pain because they're C-stands and they're not hanging and I don't have a motor for it or whatever, but I can get things in and out. The thing is that when you're lighting, and the same thing with the cameras and everything else as well for video, just remember that when you make decisions about I'm going to not go through that trouble or I'm not going to go through that expense, you are limiting your creativity that way, because what happens is you can't do that thing, or that will take a long time to move, or this will take a long time to fix, or this will take a long time to adjust. When you reduce the amount of time it takes to adjust things, you increase the things that you do with those things. And so you have to keep that in mind too, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say, in my old studio, famously, I had what's called an IFF studio rail, and I think I can bring up a picture of it. This whole system, which you can see is mounted on pipes that hang down from the ceiling that are mounted up there. And then the rails have different things that slide along them. Here's the curtain rail for the back. You can see tie bars across. It's a whole system that allows you to not only bring drapes and things like that around, but you can see the little clips for cables and things like that. Now, this is designed for people who are in a studio and you want to reconfigure lighting and stuff like that very quickly. And that is the point. In a commercial studio where you want to get work done, time is money. And if you've got people coming in and you need to move a light, having something like this rather than a stand mounted light that you have to make sure that you have room for to move on the ground. Here, you just take that little pole that, I don't know if you can see it here in the last photo I just showed. There's a silver pole on the right side. That is a pole with a hook that's designed to use the carriage brakes that you see in the upper right-hand corner of the photo. You can literally lock that crossbar and move the carriage by pulling down on that lock, unlock it, move it, lock it in place. So you literally have control over all the geometry of where a light is going to be set. It's all above you. There are no hanging cables. It is an incredibly efficient and safe system, but it requires an investment. You have to have a place to put it, be able to mount it. It took us a long time to mount that and get it all in place. But once you did that, you have the flexibility of being able to work fast, to react to changes, right? If I'm shooting something and they say there's just not enough space between the two people, you move a chair over 1.5 feet or 2 feet, and I can grab that pole and adjust my lighting in 2 minutes or 3 minutes and get to work getting the shot done. So it's the efficiency that these tools allow you to do, whether it's a grid or a rail system or whatever. They're just efficiency tools.
And when we talk about those efficiency tools, also is one of the things that I buy pretty quickly if I'm doing a lot of shooting is a small jib. The smallest jibs I've tried. They're very hard to use. So Pro Aim and a couple other ones make them for a couple $100s, and that's probably too inexpensive. But if you think about budgeting about $2,000 for a small jib, you can get an easy jib. Porta Brace makes a couple, not Porta Brace, but Porta Jib. But these are small jibs. I don't oftentimes even use them to move anything. Like people go, well, I'm not going to do a big jib shot. I use it because it's just really easy to get my camera where I want it as I figure things out. Like, so I just can grab onto a camera. I want it over here. I want it over here. I want this shot over here. The amount of time you save not having to move your sticks is a pretty profound, and you get a lot more done, especially if you're building something like training. I got a close up here. I got an overhead here. I got something else here. It's so much faster. So while it's an expense, but think about budgeting about $2,000 for a jib, not $300. I tried the cheaper ones. I was like, I really need to have something. I don't want to spend a lot of money on it. I just spent a lot of time dealing with it, and it wasn't worth it. You want to get to the jibs that can actually, and you can put these together in 15 minutes. We fly with them, show up somewhere, and just throw them up. It's really easy. It's especially if you're shooting also B-roll. Jibs are just amazing. Just a little bit of movement adds a lot. And also, again, I need to get something over this mixer board, or I need to get some shot. So much easier with a jib. Next question.
Next one comes from Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. He says, what are my choices for budget mic mute versus Dante?
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I use the Rolls MS-111, as does Bill Davis. I took his advice on buying this, and I'm very happy with it.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I actually own 2 of these. That's why I'm able to hold one in my hand with my right finger on another one. They're relatively quiet. They're surprisingly heavy, which is nice because it sits on your desk in fixed position, and the rubber feet on the bottom means it's not going to move around. So you get used to where it is and where your finger is positioned. And the thing that I like about this one, even better than some of the higher end ones that have the square clickable buttons, is the detent on the switch here is overt. You can see when it's up and you can see when it's down. And more importantly, you can feel when it's up and feel when it's down. And I have this set not to momentary, which is possible, but I have it set to click on and click off. So just rubbing my finger over the top of it, I always know if my mic is live or not live, and that makes it less prone to error.
Good, Tom.
Yeah, we didn't mention this is $59, not $1,500.
I don't know where the 1,500 came from, because I have one that's more expensive. The one that I'm using is a Model 205, but I paid $800 for it. So I think Mitchell had bought other things with it that I think he thought were necessary. But the one that I bought, at least, I have a 205, and that's that is I have a lot of other things I could do with it, which is it's got 2 channels it's on Dante, has two channels of talkback, so I can talk into the comms that I'm not using right now. Sorry, Mickey. Anyway, so, but I will, someday I'll use. Next question.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Would a single bright high CRI light coupled with a bounce reflectors be a viable alternative over a 2 to 3 unit lighting kit This is typical of flash photography, and what are the pros and cons of using it for video?
All right, go ahead, Bill.
So the way that photos typically work, you have these things and they are studio strobes. That's how most people learn lighting for photography. Not even an on-camera strobe or the little flash things, but for serious photography, you end up with studio strobes. So a studio strobe puts out this momentary huge burst of light. The technology to do that, those flash tubes are well known. Everybody knows the color temperature of them. The modifiers are robust. Generally, they have what's called a Bowen's mount on them, which is a circular mount with little square cubes on it, and you push the modifier, whatever it is. And there's a gigantic ecosystem of all these modifiers. So from somebody who learns lighting in that photo idea, you kind of get spoiled because you can put out so much light for that instant that your shutter is open on a photo capture that you really have super control. In fact, you can work in a bright room with open windows and still get a dark look behind somebody because you can put out so much light just for the time that your shutter is open that it's easy to control lighting. That is not the way it works in video. In video, you have an open gate or an open light path to your CCD, and you have to deal with everything coming into it. And the only lights that come anywhere even close to approaching the intensity of flash are HMI lights, or some of these huge carbon arc kinds of things that you might see in a stage production. And even those can't get the amount of light you can get out of 2 or 3 flashes. So you're playing in 2 different environments for creating the light. And then once, if you have enough light, then modifying it becomes relatively easy because I can always cut down an amount of light. If I don't have enough light, the only option is to open up my aperture more, which changes depth of field or maybe add more gain. It just gets more difficult. So honestly, there's a different set of thinking you do with photo lighting than you do with live video lighting. Getting closer, but not all the way there yet. And I still think they're 2 different disciplines you have to learn separately.
Yeah, no, I think that I think you're right. And it depends on what kind of video you're doing. If you're doing film lighting, there's a lot of things. If you're doing portrait or you're doing someone who's going to look good, I really like big sources. Like large sources make a big difference. Now, we do that sometimes with diffusion. We'll put up 4-foot squares on either side of the person or around them and then hit those squares with something to give them a big diffuse look if we're using more traditional stuff. But I really love very large light sources and ways to find those. And I sometimes use reflectors, but I usually just use very large sources. If you look at the light pads and some of the stuff that's LEDs, they're LEDs on a mesh that you can roll up literally and walk away. They're pretty powerful. They're not the most cost effective, but they're a lot of these kinds of kind of fabric based LEDs are pretty useful. You cover a lot of area. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. What are some drawbacks to using those famous ring lights?
Go ahead, John.
One of the drawbacks could be the spill that's coming out because you're not really controlling that light. If you're wearing glasses, the angle of that ring light on you is going to be a problem. And really the purpose of it is people want it for getting their eyes to really pop in video. And so if you're wearing glasses, it's not really a really good use case for you. And it's going to be very direct, much more harsher light than a softbox.
You go, Bill.
Yeah, first and foremost, I think people like the circular catch light if they're used correctly, and that is at the right distance such that the circular catch light surrounds somebody's pupil and looks pretty natural. But that means that you're shooting through the center of the ring light. I have seen a lot of people take ring lights and use them as a general purpose instrument, which means they put them off angle so that maybe they're 45 degrees up and slightly above. It then just becomes another source. It is a kind of a broad source, and Alex is exactly right. Flattering light for people tends to be broad sources as opposed to point sources. A very small light emitter hitting your face, if you have a lot of wrinkles, will emphasize those wrinkles. If you can get the light coming in from a variety of angles, it softens up your face. So ring lights are used a lot for that kind of beauty lighting, but they are kind of, for me, a one-trick pony. They're really good used correctly. In fact, they're fabulous used correctly for like a makeup demo, but used improperly, they can get you into trouble.
I'm always surprised that, if you think about a ring light, think about it from the side. I'm always surprised that someone hasn't built, maybe they have and I just haven't found it. But if you think about it, something that would clip on that would just make it a big dome, like just pop it on. So I know that I'm going to use it off to the side. And what I want is just like a big dome that is going to be nice and diffuse as opposed to that ring light. And I always feel like that would be a really good use of that. Next
I wonder
question.
if they think that an umbrella reflector, it is so inexpensive and does that same kind of light really easy and portable. Maybe.
But I don't know how that would fit onto the. I mean, a current ring, if you just had elastic, even, but with some structure to it, like just some metal, armature or whatever, just like for whatever to give it some rigidness, and just was able to pull it onto it. It just feels like it would be something people would use. Next question.
Interesting to try.
Yeah.
Next question comes from Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. For non-portable truss systems, would Unistrut, used in electrical commercial industry, be a cost-effective solution for a home office studio? These have channel connectors for a variety of uses.
You could. The problem is you're mixing and matching. So as soon as you grow out of it, you're going to be frustrated. So if you go through the trouble of building that out, as soon as you start buying real lights and real fixtures that are designed for production, this thing that you built will now have to go away. So it's not, and so I think that you could start that way, but I think that you would end up moving because you're going to start buying things and then those things are designed to work with other things, like not home things. So I think that that's the challenge that you'll have there. Next question.
David Brady in New York City says, a New York City apartment woes maximum lighting in limited space. Are there any budget-friendly bicolor LED roll-up type lights that'll provide a nice wash of light? Also, with said light, what cutting options are there? Simple foam core, barn door?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So here's the problem. You're talking barn doors. Barn doors work really well on focused beams of light. And by focused, I mean sometimes an open face small light or something with a Fresnel lens. That's that particular kind of glass lens. They're very thick and they have kind of circles on them. Both of those shape the beam of light coming out of the reflector in the back of the light and send it in a direction. When you do that, if you bring in a barn door, you can cut the beam. You usually don't have a super hard edge to that shadow unless you're using a particular par can or something like that has a really, really focused light. But without that, so you can bring it in and focus it. A panel of lights, whatever the panel is light is being generated by, let's say it's a whole bunch of beads in a typical LED fixture. You bring that same barn door in, it does not cut the light. It actually turns the light into, depending on how far you go in, like a Venetian blind kind of look, because each light is its own little spotlight. So cutting off some of the spotlights on the outside does not change how the center spotlights that aren't cut off spreads their beam out. So they do not work like traditional fixtures. So if what your goal is control of your light, being able to cut and shape it with barn doors or cookies or something like that, LED panels of any kind just don't work. You need a focused original origin of your light, and then some sort of lens system for the barn door to do what it's really going to do. Now, talking about maybe foam core barn doors, you can do that, but to bring them in enough to really get that spill off of things, you have to almost get down to a single row of lights, and it just doesn't work that way. Sorry.
Yeah, it just depends on the price that you want to spend on things. So like you can look at something like Westcott has some of their, what they call their Flex Cine. And I don't know if those are cost effective enough for what you're doing there, but they have everything from, 1x1s and 1x3s. A lot of these things can get a lot bigger, but these are they're basically LEDs that are on fabric. And so you can put them and bend them and do all kinds of other things to them. We do use a lot of foam core, black foam core, to block things out as needed by the thing. It doesn't work perfectly, but it definitely, with enough of it, you can flag a lot of things off. So you can definitely use the foam core there. There are many. If you're looking for flexible LED panels, the other thing you can look at is stuff like Alibaba and so on and so forth. If you're really looking for cost effective, these are things that are sold in those areas. Your CRI may be lower, but it may not matter because you have a nice big area that you can kind of cover there. So, but what you're looking for is flexible LED panels, and there is a long string of them. We see them. They're probably the fastest growing area of of lighting. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the other thing to think about is think about distance. If you want to do cutting of some sort of soft fixtures, and if you can move a big black panel piece of foam core, if you buy a big enough one, move it away from the light, you will have a harder edge and it'll do a better job of cutting. It's very much the same thing that why you get a really hard shadow out of sunlight, even though the sun is inarguably huge, it is inarguably distant. So that makes the soft light work as a point source. You're just always battling. The farther you move away, you get the inverse square principle, the less light you get falling on your subject, but the more point sourcey that soft thing becomes. So lighting is always about a balance, distance versus power versus how much light you need on your subject.
Next question.
Next question comes from Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. Routers and switches and access points. Oh my.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, you can start with Meraki at the high end, and then you can move on down. I use Ubiquiti here at the house, and there's also a good brand called PF Sense that I think a number of the panelists will like.
On the Ubiquiti, are you using the Dream Machine?
I am. The UDM Pro. It's right back here.
Right.
And I use a number of their switches and then hardwire to both the bedroom and entertainment center. And then 2 access points, one at the south end of the house, one at the north end of the house. And that covers pretty much the whole property.
That's great. Next question.
Next question from Josh Kramer and Kaufman, good heavens, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Sorry, Josh. What is an example and use cases of when you would not recommend the use of a cell phone over dedicated cameras? Input and output requirements, depth of field, or simply the need to impress the client?
Well, the need to impress the client is pretty high. Unless the client asks for a cell phone, don't show up with a cell phone and say that you can shoot it. I think that's, so the big thing is that it's just very hard to get precision. The cell phone does a lot of, and Filmic Pro makes it easier to get some of those, some of the control back to be a film camera, but it's still not a film camera. It's not shooting in RAW. It is not shooting, you don't have interchangeable lenses in an easy sort of way. The quality of the glass that you can buy for a larger camera is much higher. So I may buy, I may rent a camera, like I got a shoot coming up, and I think our lenses, just the lenses, if I bought them, are $100,000. We're renting them for much less. So, and so I can have really, really good glass on, in this case, I think an Arri that we're putting in there. But, for a couple $1,000s for the shoot, we're going to have, a really good package, something that will definitely look different than a phone, and I think that's the real challenge is we have to kind of think through that pretty carefully. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, for me, it's been a process of learning what its strengths are and what its weaknesses are. And I would say that I'm literally about 6 to 8 months into that process. And I feel like I'm about halfway there. And literally, even though I've been shooting my whole life on a variety of cameras, big and small, some things the phone in the right rig, in the right circumstance, can be absolutely gorgeous and do fabulous footage. But if you need it to do something because you find yourself in a bad situation and want to be able to fix that situation with control, it fails miserably. So for me, it's the more time I go out and shoot with it, the more time I learn when are the capabilities of the phone camera matched to my goals in shooting this video. And if they are well matched, and there can be well matched in a lot of things. I did a video not too long ago, of an art exhibit, a street art fair, and my phone on a monopod outperformed the Blackmagic 6K that I was also carrying in the car, because mobility, the ability to reach high and reach low, get various angles, and the way that iPhone 12 Plus handled mixed lighting all made it a superior solution. I could have gotten the same thing with the Blackmagic and maybe even a little more resolution, but it would have been much harder to operate, and I would have been 3 times more tired at the end of the shoot because I was out there for 2 hours and it's a much heavier rig. So sometimes you just have to figure horses for courses. What are the strengths? Let me use it for what it's strong at, and let me also have a backup just in case it fails because I can't get audio into it or something that I need just suddenly.
And on the other side of that, by the way, we had a shoot where I've talked about it in the past, so I won't belabor that, but our broadcast truck went down. And while we were getting it back up, we couldn't use the triax that went to the cameras. And we had a shot that we were going to bank, just a bank of our VIP walking down a red carpet and then going into the building. So we're just going to record that to an EVS and play it back out again. But we don't have access to the triax because the truck is down. And so while we were bringing the truck back up and figuring those things out, we ran out with an iPhone, shot the whole thing walking by, and then banked it and played it out, and no one noticed. It was because it was outdoor, it's news kind of ENG kind of thing. The other thing to notice is that when one of the things I noticed when I was in DC, I lived in DC for a while, for about 6 months while we were working on our studio, and where we were was where all the European news organizations are. I mean, that was literally the floor we were on, was every news organization from Europe was there. And what we found really interesting about that was that they're all shooting most of their coverage with iPhones. When we first got there 10 years ago or 10 years before, it was all ENG cameras, and there were 3 people, and they'd go out to everything. Even they do these little stand-ups right outside the building or right on the roof of the building, because it was a good place to do those things. So they do these weird little stand-ups but they have a big camera and all this other stuff. By the time I left, it was one reporter who would drop that thing onto a little like monopod, or slightly halfway between a monopod and a tripod. They'd set it out there, and they'd hit record, and they'd just do their thing and then walk back in. And it's because budgets got crunched a little bit. I don't think the broadcasters saw any difference, because the iPhone was shooting at 4K instead of whatever the SD, not SD, but the HD that it was going out in. So it's just a fascinating thing of how much this has changed in that process. Even for me, when I started covering conferences with video, and that would have been almost 20 years ago, we were using all kinds of cameras, and when we started covering things in a more serious way, we were using EX1s and EX3s and covered that. And there was some point about 2011, 2012, where I just decided the phone was, to Bill's point, the phone was faster, and the content didn't look any different for what I was doing, and so when I'm doing it by myself and I'm just doing coverage, I found that it was just a way better solution to grab it, because again, to what Bill was talking about, the practicality of, I'm not trying to create art, I'm trying to cover something. And the phone is exceptional at that. It just does a lot of things automatically that make it great. It looks good. It just works. The only thing that becomes challenging is figuring out how you're going to get audio into the phone. So if you can get quality, well, we literally did a lot of stuff. There was a lot of things that we did where we're streaming to Facebook, and you would get more people watching the way Facebook's algorithm worked. If you were coming in from a phone, more people would be watching than if you came in from a RTMP stream. And so what we would do is we had this little rig, had electrosonic wireless, but push that all into a little converter box. And then put that into the headphone jack. But it meant that we were able to get quality audio, out of it. So getting quality audio into the phone is the big challenge, and making sure that you have a good interface for that. But then after that, it's the video itself, and then you build a little rig around it, and it works pretty well. And a lot of people are building some pretty complex rigs around the phones as well that make it look a lot bigger. For a consumer might look at it and go, oh, that's a big camera system, but it's just a phone. So there's a lot of things that can go on there. Next question.
Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach, Florida says, for video, can you get away with using the modeling lights on existing photography flash strobe units?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I don't really think so, and here's why. Most of those are relatively low powered. Some of the super sensitive cameras, like the Sonys and things like that, you might be able to get away with it. But they're generally, modeling lights are for photographers who want to see how the shadows from that angle are falling on a subject, whether it's a model or a sculpture or whatever. And read the shadows such that they know when the flash goes off, whether their angles, and everything else has to do with it, things are right. They're not really for illuminating the subject as much as reading how the subject takes light. And so most of them, I think, are just too weak to do a very good job of that. If you want a continuous light, you should buy continuous lights, and they're more and more affordable all the time. And for me, I want something that puts out a lot of light if I can get it. because I can always cut backlight using gels or scrims or other things. If you don't have enough power, other than moving the light closer, you can't get more light on the subject, and that changes angles of incidence and how big the source appears and a whole bunch of other things. So I like more power wider away from subjects, and then you can always dial it back.
Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Rent versus own, what are the considerations for each? Might the ability to become familiar with owned equipment be a good reason to choose a budget solution over a technically superior rental with the potentially steep learning curve?
Yeah. So I mix and match this all the time. What we try to do, and I will say that we have to credit, Blackmagic has changed how this all works dramatically. What we can do with, it used to be all rent because we couldn't afford a gear, that you couldn't afford the Grass Valley or and I even paid for, a cheap switcher back then was a $26,000 Panasonic 400 or 4,000, 4,000. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, there was the 400, which was the tiny little one. And then there was the bigger 450, sorry, not the 4,000, 450, the Panasonic 450. And that was like $26,000 all in to make that work. And we owned it. Now, why we own it, a couple of reasons. One is you look at the amount of times you're going to use it. So how fast will it amortize? So when you're going to buy it, like how fast are you going to pay it off? One thing I don't do is I don't give away hardware. So I don't say, oh, we'll just throw my hardware in with me. I always charge for it. So I calculate it into the overall cost of the show. Hardware has to work. It has to make money. Otherwise, you don't take care of it. It runs out of room. So I buy hardware and then I rent it back, typically at about market rate or sometimes a little less than market rate for that rental. And the reason I do that is because I need to be able to continue to invest in those things. And usually, what I have in my my calculations are, I usually allow myself. Now, this is when I owned a company. It's a little different with own, I know, but a little different. But when I owned a company, I set aside 30% of the rental fees to buy more things. So I kept 2/3 of it and set aside 1/3 of it. And I would and that's how you end up with a 10,000 foot warehouse full of toys. Anyway, so because you just keep on, because some days that was, $300. And some days I think the most we ever had was like 160,000 was 1/3 of the rental. Anyway, so we bought a lot of gear. I bought a whole ClearCom system. Anyway, so those are the kind of things that you look at. But when you buy it, the big thing with owning them, if you're going to rent them back to your clients, again, the advantage for the client is you're charging the same amount they'd pay to a rental house. So like if they say they don't want to rent your equipment, then you go rent somebody else's equipment and then they'll pay for the same price. So it's not any different for the client, and clients usually understand the need to rent equipment. If your client says, I'm not going to pay to rent the equipment because you own it, get another client. Like literally they are poison. Like they're just worthless, just throw those people back in the water, and let somebody else let them run somebody else into the ground, so anyway, if you're going to rent it back for, and I just want to say one thing about that. There is always enough clients. Just so you know, it's the fact that you can't get to them, the fact that you haven't found them, the fact there's always enough clients out there to do work. And so what gets people caught up is filling their time with bad ones. When you start to figure out what you're going to rent, you have to figure out how fast you're going to amortize it. And that's really the only calculation that you make is, can you afford to let it amortize over 2 years? Most of the time for me, I looked at it, I wanted to amortize in 6 months. I wanted to be paid off in 6 months from rentals, or I won't buy it, I'll rent it. And usually what that meant is I owned everything in the core, because that's the hardest part to set up. So what I like to do is when I show up for a production, I want to show up with everything wired, pre-wired, all ready to go. We tested it in the office. We made it all work. You can't do that with rentals because it'd be too expensive. So I want everything to be pre-wired and all set up. The main thing is that the parts that I rent are usually on the edge, and they're typically things that are really expensive, like bigger cameras. If I'm going to use, I own Blackmagic cameras and I use them heavily. But there are times when I go, well, I'm going to use a Sony Venice I don't generally switch over until I'm going to a Sony Venice or an RE camera. And so we get those for some of the productions. But we, oftentimes we'll get those. The lenses I did buy them, and it was great to own good lenses. So it was, but they're very expensive. We were busy enough that we could do it. We had Cabrillo, Verazoom, or the Fujinon Cabrillo lenses. Sorry, and but those that's where I start renting lenses. You can rent an Angenieux or a Cabrillo for hundreds or low thousands for a project, or for borrow lenses. You can rent a lot of this stuff for hundreds of dollars and not spend $10,000 or $30,000. And you're going to get a great image, and much better than you're going to get from the lenses that you can afford at that moment. So lenses are a thing that I rent a lot of. I rent tripods because the tripods I want to use are $10,000 and above, and they cost like $100 to rent. So that the math. So you just look at the other thing you want to look at for rental is the delta between the rental cost. Is it what's the multiplier on your rental? Is it 10 to 1? 10 to 1, I start thinking I'm going to buy it. 100 to 1, no, I'm not going to buy it. And tripods oftentimes sit at 100 to 1 as far as rentals. And so those are the things you want to look at. And typical for most stuff used to be 50 to 1, 100 to 1 for some durable goods like C-stands and tripods and stuff like that. But when they get down to 10 to 1, which is a lot of technical stuff, it starts to be worth, I'd rather get 10 to 1 than give it to somebody else. So that's where I started thinking about buying those things. Anyway, there's we have a lot of time. So that's why I kind of gave you a more full answer. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Douglas Carmichael again. Wouldn't 80-20 be a bit more useful for home small studio work than proper truss?
Yeah. So I wouldn't use it for overhead. I meant to say that. I'm really glad you brought this up, Douglas, because I meant to talk about that a little bit when we were talking about it earlier. When you're putting up monitors, that's where a lot of us use the 80-20 rig. And so basically, if you look at it from the side, you kind of have it go down. But what we do is we build feet that stick out like this. They got a little bit in the back, a lot in the front. That gives you a nice stable lever. And then you have it going down here, and then you run them across. And you do a step every 4 to 6 feet or whatever, and go all the way across. What's nice about that is that'll be pretty near the wall, and you can hang lots of monitors on it. And the 80-20 system has so many options for Visa mounts and all kinds of other things, and you can run all your cables along them, and it's really, really great. I wouldn't use them for overhead; they're just not built for that. But I would use them. They're great for setting up monitors. The thing to remember always when you build a wall, though, is depending on people like me, a little horizontally challenged, make sure you have enough room back here to walk. so you make sure you can get back there, and you can actually get in there and move your wires around. A lot of people have a tendency to push this right up against the back. It's a bummer, or get them on wheels so that you can pull the whole system out, and build your wiring so that you can pull the whole system out, do what you want to do, and push it back in. But always make sure that you understand what your egress is going to be for the back of your monitors. A lot of people make the mistake of attaching them to the wall, or not having enough space, or not having wheels. And when you do all of those things, it's a little island of hell. Next question.
Next question comes from Jeff Cohen in Miami Beach, Florida. Thoughts on getting dual purpose use out of smart lighting like hue bulbs, day-to-day lighting settings, and on-camera settings?
Oh, go ahead, Bill.
See, here's the thing. The type of lighting equipment you use, and hue bulbs are very useful for large area lighting and things like that. And they have their place. The ability to change their color temperature makes them useful in a lot of things. I would use them in a background setting. But you also have to think about, they're designed to go into a lamp type fixture. How useful is that going to be in terms of being able to dial in where you want the lighting coming from and where you want the light to fall and the nature of the light? And I'll give you an example. The reason I set up my studio and put in all that grid and things like that is I wanted to learn about photo lighting. And at one point, one of my son's friends, a young lady named Lissa, came over, and she had just gotten a magenta mohawk. I thought, wow, that's really striking. Do you mind if I take a picture? And she was all in on it, and she went home and redid her makeup and stuff like that. She came by, and I took this picture. And this picture can only be done in a studio. It is a process of the maximum amount of control. I've got all sorts of different kind of color temperatures going. I'm trying to get soft edge shadows on everywhere. Her hair was the dominant feature, so I lit that with a particular color temperature. So I had a different fixture type behind her that I had in front of her. I needed to mask everything off so that only the parts that I wanted to take light, that's where the light fell and nowhere else. It took me maybe 15 or 20 minutes to just set up the lighting pattern. And the only way you can accomplish that is if you understand the nature of the device itself that you're lighting with. So the output of light that's coming out, and have the control to shape light so that it falls where you do want it to and it doesn't fall where you don't want it to. Something like hue bulbs have their position and their place in the ecosystem, but you're never going to take 4 of those and create a shot like that, or a video that is specific to directing you to the eyes of the person. You need more equipment and more technique to be able to direct your viewers' eyes where you want their eyes to hit.
Now, you can get production level versions of this. Aperture makes the 7C, which it will still go into traditional fixtures, but you have a lot more control over it. And it's really built more for production so that its cycle rates and everything else are a little bit better. I moved from the hue lights to the apertures because I take them to hotel rooms. So some people have seen some of these. I throw these into the fixtures in the hotel room to color my background, but I would never use either one of those as a key light. There's just not enough juice to it. Next question.
Next question, Rob Collins in Kansas City, Missouri says, what budget camera would you hand to a friend or family member to help them look better? One of the better Logitechs, the Elgato facecam, or something else?
Yeah, so I'm really, really happy with the at this point from a web camera perspective, the one that I really recommend is the 360, the Insta360 Link. Wow. Just such a great camera. Its color rendition is a lot better than any. I think it's the best web camera out there right now. So color rendition is really good. The control software is very good. The fact that it's a little PTZ camera, so that's about $300. I would also look at the Sony. If you step up a little bit, the Sony 5100, the A5100 is a good little camera that has an HDMI output, and that is going to look really nice as far as the output as a better webcam. And then once you step up from the Sony, I think the next step up is really either the Blackmagic 4K or 6K, especially if they want a switcher, and they want to start controlling those things. That's the next step up from there that I would take. But I would say if they're already in a webcam and they have something, want to get something a little bit better, I do think that right now I think that the Insta360 is the best webcam out there. And then I would step up to the 5100 and then to the Blackmagics. Go ahead, Bill.
Alex has always said, and I agree with him 100%, that it's also, that camera is only going to record the light that's reflecting off the subject. So if you can move to bigger, softer sources, that will be flattering to more people than the window across the room or that light you turn on your desk. So it's a combination. Decent camera that'll capture it, but pay attention to the light.
Yeah, it's such a, the big thing with the Insta360 too is that we're building these new kits right now. We're designing them so that we can send them out to people. And I've just decided I'm sending out a Mac Mini or a laptop or one or the other to send them out with folks because I want to be able to, I can open up screen share and I can just move that camera around. So I don't have to ask them to move their camera. I can just kind of refocus it to what I need. And I can save those presets. And the Huddle Cam does some of that stuff inside of the sensor. But the fact that this one has better software, and software is important, so that's something to think about there. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Nope, that's Tom Ferguson. Tom Ferguson. What are you using for budget lighting?
Good, Tom.
Well, I'm using the Nanlite 6C Pava tubes. They're $80 a piece. Right now, I've got a white one above the teleprompter, and then I tuned in the one behind the rack there to be blue. They're very easy to mount. You have 1/4-20 threads on both ends, as well as magnets on the back of these things that you can just stick them onto an L bracket or anything else, and they just stay there.
Good, Bill.
My two go-to really cheap lights are both from Neewer. I use the Neewer 160s in my voice booth with a lot of gelling and control over them. They're a small LED array, but they're very bright. So they put out a lot of lights. You can control them a little bit that way. And then here, my key lights are also Neewer panels. They're 4 by 10s, I think. So they're wider than they are tall, which to me adds a little bit of softness on some of my older face issues.
Yeah, I think that if you use them like the way Bill uses them, the newer stuff works pretty well because he doesn't change them very often. I did find that the build on the newers is pretty rough, and if you're going to change them a lot or fiddle with them a lot, they won't last very long. so that, if you're going to move them around, they're not a travel light, and they're not going to be. I'm going to use these as my production lights or whatever. Bill's using them perfectly, which is that they're there. He doesn't change them very often. They do what they need to do. I find that the build quality, the next step up from there is really the Nan lights, which I have a bunch of the 6Cs that I take on. We send those out in kits, and I also I pack those. I have like 4 of them that I pack that I usually take. They all, because of the magnets, they all snap together. And I thought that would get me a lot of attention at TSA, but it doesn't. No, they opened up my bag and I was like, oh, this is it. And it was just like hair product or something I didn't like. And so, anyway, so the 6Cs are I think are really good. I have a lot of Nan lights. We bought hundreds of them. So I think that of all different sizes, I think we have up to 200s in the office. And the one that we typically send out are the 68Cs or 68Bs are the ones that we have probably the most of right now. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Budget personnel. What are the equipment choice considerations when a production relies on volunteers or novice operators? To what extent might the complicated menus and interface of more professional equipment become a liability versus an asset?
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I do think that is an issue. I think you're identifying one. I know that I would never hand a volunteer a Blackmagic 6K and say, go shoot this thing. The setting possibilities, the getting it wrong, unless of course you set it up and get it on a tripod and say, just push this button and you'll start shooting. They are complicated things, and they are getting more and more complicated. Even the less expensive camcorders and simple things designed for consumer use have 10 layers deep of menus in fact, one of the hardest cameras to operate I ever had were my original little GoPros. It was just almost impossible to get down and change things.
Whoever made the GoPro menu should have been fired a long time ago. I mean, I think it's new now because they suddenly got better. But up until like version 6 or something like that, or 5, or it was just like, what are you guys like? Why did we do this? Like, what part of this made sense?
Yeah, 4 minutes to get to the menu you want to reset that you have to reset every time. Come on.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was
insane.
I got really good at it because we would do with GoPros, we had 6 at a time because we were doing spherical. And so you get really good at just going through the menus really fast and getting them all set up the same way. And so you did get fast. I understood that like people who are jumping off of cliffs or whatever, using them all the time, probably knew what they were doing there. But wow, was it frustrating? They were really frustrating. I actually think that the Blackmagic 6Ks and 4Ks are the easiest cameras to use because so much of the menu is right in front of you. So you can show people how to make minor adjustments to them relatively quickly. If they're not, to me, that's the entry level if they're not going to use their phone. Like everything else to me is more complicated. Like I find that all the other cameras below and above them are more complicated to set up than the 6Ks. The only thing you get caught up with the 6Ks, the thing we have to be careful of is when people double LUT, which I find the fascinating that you can do that with a camera, which is that if you set your LUT in the record and you set your LUT in the display, what coming out of that camera has got 2 LUTs on it, and it looks very contrasty. so anyway, those are the things that I would I think that I build systems largely so that I can train teams. So I don't I'm not going to train them at all. But I build systems all over the world, and one of the big things is how do we get to a point where they can use them easily and come up to speed. One of the things that I think has just been genius by Blackmagic again is the fact that you can get little switchers that are relatively inexpensive. So in Africa, in Rwanda, one of the things we have is I think we're just getting some of these these little ATEMs. Now they've had the bigger ATEMs that I donated to the school a long time ago, and so but what's cool is if you have a multi-room event that isn't very complicated, you can cover the smaller rooms with a little ATEM mini, and they're learning how to cut. They're learning how to cut. They have the same interface. They have all the same pieces. Then when they go to the big room and there's a 4ME or a 2ME or a Constellation or whatever, the level of training that has to get them there is much lower because they already understand the overall interface and all these other bits and pieces. And I find that, and then again, we do try to get most of the settings. I really work hard at, if we're bringing in volunteers or novices, is to get, you have to have one or two core people that you're paying that are going to fix a bunch of the tech and then make it all work. And then you can have a lot of volunteers working around it. They don't, on a moment by moment basis, you don't need high skills, but you do need something's going wrong. You need someone to be able to plug the hole. So next question.
Next question comes from Josh Kaufman. Budget balance. What are the traps of spending the correct ratios of a balanced budget? And what he means by that, camera body versus lens versus lighting versus scenery budgets. What's a good balance on labor versus gear and why?
I don't have a balance. Like, I don't know if I've ever thought about that. To be honest, like, I don't think about the balance of it. I think about, what do I need for this project? I need this many people for this much time, and I need this hardware, and I need these things. I don't look at it like it's got to be a third, or 25%, 50%, 25%, or any of those numbers. I make a list of the people that I need. I make a list of what they need to do. I need to look at how much pre-pro is required and how much I try to fit into, get close to the budget that I was given. And we figure out what that is, but I don't have a ratio. I have what's needed for this project. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the other thing is just doing an assessment of what you think the depreciation on the various assets are going to be. Anything that has power, the depreciation potential, maybe lighting gear accepted, but even that's just gone through a big change. Cameras, audio equipment. In the old days, you could count it lasting for years. In the new days, not so much. I will say things like good lenses and things like that used to hold their value incredibly well over the course of time. And glass from 20 years ago, if you can get the right mount or an adapter, will still give you a beautiful picture today. But we've now seen the micro four thirds change and some mounts change. And so all of a sudden, some of those legacy collections of fixed assets like lenses aren't as worth as much as they were before. So everything changes, and the balance. Labor is going to be your most controllable cost always, because you need the gear to do that, and you can probably get away with 2 PAs instead of 3. Although you probably will get take a hit on efficiency if you do that, but there's always a balance, and that's the point of being a producer, is you're trying to always hit the right balance between costs and efficiency.
Well done. So good. Well done. Thanks to the producers for all the great questions. Keep us all going, and driving both the first hour and the second hour. A great conversation as always. How do we do this? 900 sometimes, and we show up every day not knowing what we're gonna talk about, but it's always interesting. The Tlaloc traversal is 61,000 miles, 944, or 99. We almost hit 100,000 kilometers, but not quite. So we didn't even get gold today, but it was a good day. It was a good conversation. We just didn't travel as much around the world. So we got silver status for the day as far as our traveling. A reminder that Ken Jordan will be here for the hour after this in after hours, talking about web development. So you would definitely want to check that out. And
did I see a note that it was canceled for today, or
was
just
it?
double check? I thought I saw something, but I might be wrong. So double check, everybody who's going.
No web lab today. I'm corrected. So never mind. Just erase that last little bit from your mind. It's canceled for today. So anyway, so we'll I'm going to have to get notes somewhere. So anyways, but great job to the panelists. Can't do this without you, and great job by the behind the scenes team that's putting together this incredible production that we're about to start really pushing on the upgrades starting next week. So stay tuned. Should be a fun ride. We'll see how that goes. And so thanks to everybody. And now we're going to go ahead and jump into after hours. No web lab. I think we need to put that into the card. Announcements.
I think I only saw it like 5 minutes before the show started. So
I can't. We need more. I was thinking about it because we have Zoom ISO. We can just put a bunch of information slides into the panel because no one sees them. And then we can just put all kinds of information up there. Sports scores. somewhere in the middle of an answer.
Stock tickers.
Yeah, stock tickers. Highlights. Yeah, exactly. All right. Gotta go.
Pithy sayings.
I can't get my mouse died. Stupid Kensington trackball.
Oh, ouch.
It's like it asks me.